Are you getting started with homeschooling and need a little inspiration? Check out The Inspired Homeschool. You can find it at theinspiredhomeschoolbook.com, and it features 10 people from history who made a really big impact in the world. People like Charles Dickens, Blaise Pascal, and our Lord and Savior Jesus, who were homeschooled for at least part of their early education. When you read The Inspired Homeschool, you'll get some ideas for how to create an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life, that Charlotte Mason underpinning of her philosophy, as well as practical applications for each subject, teaching language arts, teaching history, teaching practical skills, teaching science and math. All of these practical ideas and applications are included in this inspiring book that you could give to a doubting parent or relative, give to your husband to read. It features these 10 different biographical sketches of people who are homeschooled, along with so much insight for creating a life-giving homeschool that can nurture genius and hope in your children. Theinspiredhomeschool.com. Find it wherever books are sold, or get some special pre-order bonuses at theinspiredhomeschoolbook.com. This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about cultivating a flourishing family culture through life-giving habits. Today on the show, I'm so excited to be chatting with my daughter, Emelie Pepito. She's had a really busy spring as she's getting ready to pass the bar. She got her Juris Doctorate, I think, a year or so ago, and she's working on the bar now. And we wanted to talk together, though, about homeschooling. I was talking to a friend this morning, and she was telling me how quite a few of the young moms in her community are putting their kids back in school or even in an intensive co-op, even though they're still in the early years of homeschooling. These are still young kids. And I understand in high school, sometimes even in middle school, outsourcing subjects that feel a little bit advanced for you to teach, maybe algebra or advanced lab science. Some of these subjects can be more intense to teach, and families might want to get some help with that. But in the early years, your homeschool really should be mostly focused on reading great books, talking about them, doing projects together, and learning through hands-on experiments and experiences. And so it breaks my heart that some of these families are, outsourcing, putting their kids into public school, sort of like letting go of what could be a really beautiful early years atmosphere, probably out of fear. And I want to talk to Emelie about it because we had a fairly relaxed homeschool in many ways. Emelie, what are some of the things that you remember about your your first 6 years of homeschooling?
I remember a lot of time. I remember a lot of time outside. I remember a lot of field trips, which I know we've talked about before on the podcast. Those were incredible. I remember a lot of reading aloud. I remember doing a lot of, and do you mean in terms of scholastic or in terms of the whole experience?
Yeah, both.
We did. I remember you used to do that game where you would ask math equation questions, like, what is 5 times 5? And then if you got it right, you got to jump, and then whoever reached you first would win. And I was a very competitive, I still am, person. And so I remember that being so fun. Except I always felt like there wasn't enough competition. My siblings didn't
Funny.
always take it as seriously as I did.
And I'm going to just explain that game really quick because, I was homeschooling anywhere from 4 to 7 kids at one time. I think I never really homeschooled 7 because you would have graduated before your youngest brother started school. But so I would do spelling bees or phonogram reviews or math reviews where I would ask a question and kids, if they answered correctly, could take a hop forward. And I would ask each child individually. So I wasn't asking for the first person because obviously the first person would have been Emelie as the oldest child. And I definitely graded the questions. Like I might have had Emelie spelling chrysanthemum and the youngest child spelling stop or something. So it wasn't like, there was competition. Maybe it didn't feel like enough for you, but I just wanted to clarify because The more you can engage your child's whole body, the more enjoyable learning will be. You don't have to sit there filling out every single worksheet to get a decent foundation in your academic subjects.
Yeah, totally. And it was, again, it added play to learning, which is hugely important for memory and retention of ideas. Um, I remember, oh my gosh, I remember Amanda coming over and we would go and we would get pollywogs or tadpoles and we'd watch them grow and their teeny tiny legs. And then we would make like the life cycle of the tadpoles. That was really fun. Um, and just a lot of hands-on learning, whether it was the art projects we were doing, whether it was making playing with clay, or actually watching tadpoles grow, or finding birds nests, or growing a garden. Like lots of learning that was tied back to the experiences. um and I loved the reading aloud so much. Like we read so many good books.
What do you think, like when you think about how you were educated compared to maybe how your friends were educated, what do you think, what sort of stands out? Because I know there were holes, like there were definitely holes. I wasn't a fantastic math teacher. I really outsourced all high school. We did humanities together. That would be you guys reading books and us talking about them. But I really didn't teach you guys lab science or advanced math. And so, unless you wanted to learn it yourself or you went to a college class or took a co-op class, it was a hole. There was a hole. But I think that some of the things, in my research that are problems is that kids who are educated mainly in the traditional ways of doing workbook pages and not a lot of reading out loud and a lot of structure and not a lot of hands-on experimentation. Partly one of the things is just a lack of confidence that you begin to think that life is more of like a game of getting things right than it is uh, a permission to explore and permission to have interest, permission to be a curious person. And I think that's one of the best gifts that you get through homeschooling, literature, and project based is that your children develop more confidence to learn. But from your experience, you went to a community college, then you got a degree at a state school, then you went to uh, a college in Northern Ireland. So you had experience with a lot of different kinds of people throughout your learning journey. So, what is some of the comparisons that you've noticed?
Well, it's really not fair because I'm only friends with people who are, we all end up in a silo, and so I'm friends with people who are curious and interesting and who like to think about things and have conversations. Um, and those are friends from kind of all walks of life. In terms of how they learn, though, like a lot of my friends did go to public school because that's just the majority of people. They only remember what actually made them come alive. And so they don't remember necessarily anything really about the stuff that your child is doing all day long in a public school. They remember anything that was interesting to them, anything that was taught by a teacher who made the subject matter come alive, or what they taught themselves after they graduated. So I have a lot of friends who are into the sciences. So some of my friends are geologists, some of them are ecologists, and they have such a passion for it, and they have learned so much, and it's really fun talking to them. But they don't necessarily, they did not learn any of that in school. And a lot of it was motivated by the experiences they had after school. So they went to school, a lot of them played sports, a lot of them just like were living that life of like, I'm just trying to get through. I want out. And then they would graduate, and a lot of them did not go straight to college. They went and they did summer jobs, they did part-time jobs in a wider range of fields. And then they went back to university with a curiosity and surrounding themselves by mentors who were also curious and willing to invest in them, and then they learned.
Wow. Which I think that's very encouraging in itself because so many moms are doing what I think is destructive practices with their children's education out of fear that they're going to miss out on something. But you need to understand that your child is responsible for their learning. Actually, you are not the person who is fully responsible for their learning, and they have a lifetime to learn. If you look at, I mentioned it before, that book, Educated by Tara Westover, where she's really kind of down on her parents for the lack of education they gave her. And yet she went on, I think she went to Cambridge or something. And so recognizing that the holes that there might be in the education you give your children isn't going to necessarily hold them back, especially if you've given them tools for learning, which would be a love for learning, great books, good conversations, knowing how to experiment and try things. And so, what I'm advocating in the Peaceful Press and in my new book, The Inspired Homeschool, isn't a lack of rigor or a lack of intensity in education. It's about choosing wisely because we only have so much time. And so you can either put your child in classes where everything is dictated to them, and it's all multiple choice and just like cramming information down their throats, or you can really light a fire in them through beautiful stories and projects and engaging nature time and really strong bonds as a family. In your experience, Emelie, going into higher learning, what do you think really matters?
I think what really matters is raising children with a solid EQ, like a solid emotional foundation, a solid family life, a solid relationship with what really matters to them and what their values are and who they want to be and why they want to be that person. Because it doesn't, like, all the education in the world is nothing if you raise somebody who, um, rejects, I think rejects God, and rejects the values that I think most of the moms who listen to our podcast want to instill in their children. And it's like, do you want to raise a smart child or do you want to raise a wholesome child? And I think a lot of times when you aim for a wholesome child, you also raise a smart child. But if you raise a smart child, a lot of times what you get is a child who is burned out, and who is detached from the values that actually make life worth living. Because I think for all of my friends, nobody goes around being like, life is so great because I learned everything I needed to learn in school. They go around, they're like, I get so much passion from, a lot of my friends are in the outdoors, and they get passionate about being out there and working to make sure that there's conservation efforts, which I admire. I love being outside. Or, like us being missionaries, like there was so much value in that. That's what made life worthwhile, not anything I've learned. And even now, like the things I'm learning they matter to me because of the impact or the tools I can now utilize for the things that matter. And it is so silly, I think, to put an emphasis on book learning over raising whole children.
Wow, that's pretty intense, Emily, and I believe the same thing. It's interesting because I mentioned this in another podcast. In the book, I talk about, I think it's John Ruskin, and he talks about how it would be better to not teach your child to read than to teach a fool to read. Like, it's such an intense quote because he's saying, like, a fool. Oh, here, hold. I found the quote. It's John Ruskin in the Parents Review, a article called "The School According to Ruskin." So I quote this in the Inspired Homeschool, and he says, "I do not care as a rule that children should learn either reading or writing. There are very few people in this world who get any good by either. Broadly and practically, whatever foolish people read does them harm. Whatever they write does other people harm. And nothing can ever prevent this. For a fool attracts folly as decayed meat attracts flies and distills and assimilates it, no matter out of what book." Obviously, I don't believe that you just shouldn't teach your kid to read if you're a fool or if they're a fool. But the point is that, we are in the Restoration Home, we are restorers of streets to dwell in. Isaiah 58, we're highlighting the goodness of God. And so it's important that you put the emphasis on truth and beauty and goodness. Marx and Hitler and Stalin and Lenin, they could all communicate their thoughts through the written word. And the world paid a high price in the death of humanity because of their poisonous thoughts. And we're still paying the price today. And so the object is not merely that you have a learned child, as John Ruskin said in another place, but that they learn to love virtue and truth and goodness. And so what we teach, especially in these early years where we're laying a foundation, like, do you really want to give your children over to a system that is completely godless and maybe even anti-God for the bulk of their time? Or do you want to take those precious early years? And I understand, like, our youngest son was in a public charter school for several classes over the last 3 years. And so I understand that there are seasons where it's helpful to have some accountability and some outsourcing. But in those early years, grades K through 6, you're not going to miss out by homeschooling them. Like, get an Explode the Code workbook if they're struggling with learning to read. Maybe find a reading tutor if you need to, or do some more reading games with them. Repeat the Nursery Nature Kindergarten with all those great hands-on phonics activities, but don't sacrifice nurturing their spirit and nurturing their moral worldview and their character development for academic readiness. Because there's so many studies that talk about how, like, all the success needed for success, or all the learning necessary for success in high school, can be taught in only 2 or 3 years of formal skill study, or another source said 100 hours of study. And so it doesn't take that long to teach a child to read, to teach basic grammar, to teach the math facts that you need to be able to succeed in algebra. But what does take a while is teaching them character and virtue. And that comes through the beautiful stories we read, the relationships we cultivate, and the quiet times that we have in nature.
Yeah, and I don't think either of us are saying don't teach your children, but I think what we're saying, or don't give them a basic education. But I just think, what you were saying about where we actually get it. We get it outside. And the amount that you actually need. Again, 100 hours, and I can totally see that. Like, my husband is so smart, but he's like, I learned all of it after school, and I taught myself. And you want to give your children an advantage, so you want to make sure you can teach them as much as possible. But what that looks like really needs to be redefined, and we need to be brave enough to redefine it. Like, why would we want to continue living under a system? Like, if you go around today and you look at if you watch, just look at the news cycle. So leave individuals out of it. Just look at the news cycle and watch how fast news comes in and out. And what you're looking at is a generation of people who can't contain or can't maintain a consistent thought of tracking a news event. And news is so fast because attention span is damaged. And look at, like, one of my boss is working on legislation with the California Senate or Congress, and he went down there and he said people don't realize just how dumb these people are. Like, they're dumb, and that's, they're successful. There's a lot going for them, but there is a dearth of real intelligence, and so and they're all coming out of the same system. So why would we emulate the same system? And will you get it wrong? Yes. Will your kids be like, I wish you taught me this, I wish you taught me that? Yeah, well, then they can correct that mistake with their kids. They can self-correct that mistake by going to I don't know what is it, trillions of gigabytes of information now on the internet that you can, fill in any deficit that you had with 1 hour of a YouTube video by somebody it's their passion and they've done a series on it. It's so easy to fill knowledge gaps. And the way that we've been schooling isn't working. So why repeat that when you have the freedom, the legal freedom, and the freedom in Christ to experiment?
Right. And this is what the Inspired Homeschool is all about, is just helping families break free from that fear. Because if you look at history, Booker T. Washington, Laura Ingalls Wilder, C.S. Lewis, Blaise Pascal, Berta Morisot, Leonardo da Vinci, all of these people were homeschooled for at least part of their education. And that is a huge part of what made them so brilliant. If you read, I need to read this again right now, it'd be so good. John Taylor Gatto's Underground History of American Education is this like intense book, and he has a few others. Dumbing Us Down is one. But the modern school system was developed to create mindless drones, people who could do the industrial work that needed to be done. It wasn't created to build statesmen. And I love some of the Oliver DeMille books like Hero Education and Thomas Jefferson Education, because he highlights that people who govern, the people who are in charge of our society, they weren't educated in traditional public schools. Many of them were educated in private schools with more of a Socratic method where you read books and you talk about them, just like C.S. Lewis was educated. And so if you want to educate your children to be leaders, to be cultural shapers instead of mere consumers and mere drones, then you need to start reading to your children and reading great books to them. If you are letting fear guide you into simply getting some box curriculum that's modeled exactly after the public school system and filling that in instead of being a little bit creative, making some room to listen to the discernment of the Holy Spirit, making room to attach as a family, because children who are attached to their parents, who feel enjoyed by their parents, are automatically going to have an edge. And, someone that I think about in this case would be both Booker T. Washington and Joan of Arc. Booker T. Washington was born in slavery, but his mom cared so much about him and made an effort to create learning opportunities for him despite her own limitations. And he went on to start a school for Black people that even modern people like Lionel Richie went to. And then Joan of Arc, she wasn't educated at all. She was raised in a peasant household, but she had time to connect with God, and that connection to God gave her the ability to discern brilliant military strategy that was far beyond her years. And so the brilliance that is in your child is more likely to be stifled by overdoing it on structured book work than by creating the atmosphere that helps learning flourish. And that atmosphere involves reading great books that portray beautiful, redemptive stories, because those great books give your children something to think about. Another one of the components is having something to do, giving them meaningful work so they feel like a part of the family, and then being interested in their interests, supporting their interests. What are some other things that you think contributed to your ability to go after such a big goal and follow through on it?
I mean, reading stories of great people. When you read these stories of people who are just ordinary, everyday people, blokes, and saw what they accomplished, it really inspires you to think, oh, I can do something, I can learn, I can overcome. And then secondly, and more importantly, my relationship with God. Like, I think the constant growth in him and the desire to be in relationship with him, and then the healing that comes from that, and the joy that comes from that, and the purpose that comes from that, and then also the idea of like I'm here for so much more than just my own happiness, which means that also my own sadness, or like the lies like, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I can't do it, or whatever the sort of self-depreciating or negative lies that we all have for one reason or another from experiences in our childhood. Those are also, like, for me, an act of disobedience. Like, it's not humility. It's just another form of disobedience to what God might be calling you to do. And that's been hugely inspirational to, like, want to use my brain to the best of its ability, want to gather skills that I can use in the furtherance of his kingdom, use my time wisely. And do I always know? I've read a lot of Dick Francis novels lately, but it is still like this it's still my goal in life. It's still my main drive. And so even on like the bad days, the bad weeks, or the times when I'm, not perfect, I still am wanting to move towards learning. And I think that I think that God created an incredible world that as Christians we should know. I think all the best scientists should be Christians. I think all the best mathematicians should be Christians. I think all the best inventors should be Christians. I think that we should be wanting to push into all these areas and all these fields and, find a creative solution where we have the benefits of AI without the downsides of it. Like that should be coming from Christians who are inspired by a creative God. And so that is probably, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I love that. And in the Inspired Homeschool, I have a whole chapter on Elizabeth Googe and living ideas, because they're all books like talking about a literature-based education. A literature-based education is superior for training a worldview than a workbook or textbook education, because children remember the stories they read more than the stories they read shape them, whereas workbooks just go in one ear and out the other. You might be able to test off a workbook, but it's not going to shape your worldview or your imagination or your hope for the future. But not all books are equal either. And so many of the books that, unfortunately, a lot of public schools aren't really assigning books at all. In my son's junior year of high school at this charter school, which is slightly advanced on the public schools, he was not assigned a single book in his English class. And so not all books are equal. Unfortunately, a lot of high schools, if they do assign books, they're not beautiful, hopeful books. And you can tell a beautiful, hopeful book. A beautiful, hopeful book leaves you feeling like you could make the world a better place. For example, contrast Horse of a Different Color by Ralph Moody. It's the last of the Little Britches series, or The Grapes of Wrath. They both are about poor people who are trying to make their own living off the land. And in Horse of a Different Color, he cultivates community, he works hard, and he gets ahead. Grapes of Wrath, they end in ruin. And so, and this is what children have been raised on in American high schools, are these kind of hopeless victim stories. And so even though they might have been reading not as much today as they had been, it's still been stories that do not incite hope and redemption, and the idea that, if Ralph Moody could pay off his debtors and continue his farm because of his hard work, his diligence, I could do that too. I could achieve a goal too because of hard work and diligence. If the stories that your children read highlight people completely being victimized, always being victimized, and the only option is to get more help from the government, then you're going to see a culture change from a free market to something that's more reliant on government control and government leading and government provision. That's a whole nother conversation. Emelie, is there anything else you'd love to say about just the bravery to homeschool, the bravery to follow your own interests and embrace wonder in educating your young children?
I think that now is 100% the time to do it. There's never been a better time to sort of buck the system. If you look around, you really want to recreate what the system's created. And we are in a time where just originality and being an individual is so special, because it's just not out there. And raising kids with strong values. And I think there's and like the future's unknown, but what a way to spend the most formative years of your children's lives adventuring and reading and having fun together. Like, you will never regret that. And, it's going to pay off, and it's going to be great.
Yeah.
So go do it.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Emelie. You can pre-order the Inspired Homeschool book at inspiredhomeschoolbook.com. And when you go to that page, inspiredhomeschoolbook.com, we'll link it in the show notes. You can also get access to pre-order bonuses like our Plan a Flourishing Homeschool Year, our master book list, and a student planner. We'll have all that in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review. It means the world to us that you listen to Emelie and I and other guests chat about life-giving habits for a flourishing family on the Restoration Home podcast.